What is a feast to a rich man? Is it a table filled with food? Is it the highest quality ingredients possible? Or is it exotic foods from halfway across the world? The reality of a rich man's feast is it is all three of those things. Now, here's the problem. I've resisted making this video for a good year. We have done the beggar's feast. We've done a poor man's feast, a poor soldier's feast, a poor officer's feast. Those feast videos are easy for us to pull off because they include the ingredients and the kinds of foods that we have every day. Even something as simple as the outfit, I can easily replicate for all those other people. But a rich man in the 18th century? Well, something like a typical rich man's outfit that he would wear to a fine dinner party in the 18th century might cost $10,000. The reality is there is a giant chasm between the classes in the 18th century. There is really not a lot of middle class. There's a tremendous quantity of poor people, or very, let's say, lower class people in the 18th century. And then this tiny sliver of extremely rich people. And they lived amazing lives. And they had these amazing dinners. Here's what I can show you, and here's what's kind of interesting. For more than, say, 10 years, we've been doing these historical food episodes. And a lot of these come out of the English cookery books of the 18th century. Now, these cookery books weren't necessarily written for the rich. The rich had French chefs and they knew exactly what they were doing. They didn't need a book to tell them how to cook fancy food. But the people who wanted to be upwardly mobile, they were looking to emulate this very, very expensive food. And so these cookbooks were created for them. The vast majority of cookbooks in this time period are written for these people that are moving from lower class and trying to look like they're upper class. So all these dishes that we've done, well, most of them are people trying to look like they're eating this rich man's feast. So the difference tends to be this quantity and quality. The fact that we would have 2 or 3 removes. In other words, the table would fill up with food 2 or 3 times in one of these fancy rich man's feasts. But what's happening with these individual dishes? We've talked about how they came out of these cookbooks. Here are the top 10 dishes that show up on the table of King George III. Chicken broth, sweet tarts, roasted capon, that's a special chicken, roast mutton, asparagus, lobster, spinach, artichokes, roast chicken, roast beef. Nothing here sounds incredible, does it? They're all probably fixed in a rather fancy way, but I mean, here they are, King George III, and he's eating, fairly plain dishes. Now, his feast is going to have all of these things on the table, plus more. Then exotic things like maybe sea turtle and all these things spiced with incredibly expensive spices and to a richness that we can't imagine. On a table with plates that each one might pay for a regular person's wages the entire year, with sterling silver silverware and expensive glasses of wine. The difference isn't necessarily in one individual dish, but in the plethora of riches that we see around us on the table. Now, we aren't going to make a table with 100 dishes. We don't have the 3 or 4 days and an army of cooks and chefs to do that. But we are going to make 3 separate dishes that you might see in a rich man's feast. We'll do a roast capon. We'll do a special spinach dish, and we'll have some amazing sweet tarts. And to drink, I have, of course, the classic dessert wine, some Madeira. We're going to be doing a roast chicken or roast capon. And they would have made this sometimes in a simple way, like we're going to do it, or very, very complicated. And in many of these fancy feasts, they would make it as complicated as they possibly could. Now, using a capon versus a chicken, that's a complication right there. You take a male chicken, and just when they start to exhibit their maleness, you neuter them, and they, of course, grow much larger and have much more tender meat. They're like a very, very large chicken of the time period. You would take this capon and first you separate the skin from the meat of the chicken, and you stuff under that butter and herbs, and then you put bacon over the top of that, and then you cover it with paper. And we've experimented with covering with paper. For our roast chicken, we will take an onion stuck with cloves, we'll place that inside the chicken, and then we'll put it on the roasting spit and roast it over the fire. So we have this table set, and it's filled with massive quantities of food. But how is it served out? We might see particular things in our mind's eye about how this fancy meal goes on with this rich person, but we would probably be mistaken. So all the kind of service that we expect, how a fancy meal is served today, is actually something that's changed a lot from the 18th century to today. Today's style is based out of the Russian style of service that starts to become popular in the early 19th century. This idea that you're sitting at the table and here's your dishes, and fancy food comes on your dish to you, and someone serves you like that. And it's all basically on your plate, and maybe there's some food items on the table. In the 18th century, we have a different style of service called the French style of service. And that is a table that you would have your empty plate in front of you with your silverware, but all around you are dishes of food. And the entire table, in fact, is laid out with all kinds of different sorts of food all around the table. So you're surrounded with dishes, and everyone at the table is surrounded likewise. And you would take a little bit and put it on your plate and possibly serve people around you. And if you wanted something from the far side of the table, you would probably ask a footman, although that could be considered kind of rude. You were so insistent on having some dish from halfway across the table that you had to ask for it. So more than likely, you would just deal with what was right around you. And there was so much. Even after this table is filled with all these dishes, you end up eating all that you need. You stop, they take all the things off the table, take your plate away, bring you a new plate, and reset the table with all new things. And they do that yet again for dessert. Can you imagine? For our spinach, we will do a classic 18th century version of creamed spinach inside of a French roll. We will take that spinach, we will stew it down in a little bit of water, and then we will chop it nice and small, mix in some cream, some butter, cook that up until it makes a nice creamy spinach sauce, and then we'll put that inside of a French roll, and then we'll cut that nicely so that it comes off, and then inside will be the green spinach. An example of some of the extravagance that we might see at one of these feasts happens in 1694, and it is in Edward Russell's house. And he's having a giant party out in his garden, and there are tables covered with cold collations, so meat dishes and whatnot, so people could just kind of wander around and eat. And there's a fountain in the middle of that, and here's a description of the fountain. In the fountain were the following ingredients: 4 hogsheads of brandy, think 200 or 300 gallons, 8 hogsheads of water, 25,000 lemons, 20 gallons of lime juice, 1,300 weight of fine white Lisbon sugar. That's very expensive in the time period. 5 pounds of grated nutmegs. Yes, 5 pounds of nutmegs. And then we have 300 toasted biscuits and a pipe of dry mountain Malaga wine. Over the fountain was a large canopy, built to keep the rain off, and built on purpose a little boat. Therein was a boy belonging to the fleet who rowed around the fountain and filled cups of the company. Yes, we have situations like this going on where people are making these extravagant sort of scenes, and they would do this especially for the dessert scene, where they might make a giant floating island. Imagine a table that's 6 feet deep and 20 feet long, and it would have a huge winter scene all done in sugar, with castles with little cannons that might fire and ships on a frozen lake. And all this is edible, well, at least sort of edible, and all just for the feast. So it's not only this amazing quantity of food, its amazing expense and richness, but sometimes it's exoticness. And we have examples of lots of dishes like that: roasted swan, and of course sea turtle. And we have people like Jefferson when he's president. He wants to show off, and he's showing off with dishes that are Italian macaroni and cheese, or he's showing off with ice cream and it's baked inside of some kind of pastry so that it looks like it's, an impossible thing. How do you bake ice cream inside of a pastry? Yes, they wanted to show off in every way possible. The question is, did they actually enjoy this, or was it just for show? We have this quote from the 18th century: "Dinner is one of the most wearisome English experiences, lasting as it does 4 or 5 hours." I don't know, taking 4 or 5 hours to figure out how to get through this meal, it does sound a little grueling. We will be making one of the classic but simpler dessert dishes that, yes, still shows up on the rich man's feast. We will be doing some classic, very small tarts. Just a small, tiny little pie that has preserves and a little bit of fresh fruit. That'll be easy and just oh so delectable. Now, this feast isn't just about the food on the table, or the beautiful plates and the glasses of expensive wine, the beautiful room that we're having this feast in, but it's about the people that have to do it. The servants that we see in the room itself that are serving the food out, and then the kitchen in the background that, of course, nobody sees, that's filled with cooks and maids making all this wonderful food. And they have probably been working at it the entire week. We see, let's say, a roasting fireplace, and it has roasting spits for 7 or 8 different pieces of meat roasting at the same time. One person that is just there to rotate the meat slowly as it cooks, so it's all cooked perfectly and even. And then people that are just working on the pastry for this wonderful feast, and other people that are making all the different dishes. It's hard for us to imagine the number of people it would take to pull off a feast that they would have probably 3 or 4 times a year. Here we are with just 3 of these dishes from the rich man's feast, and it's already a rich meal with a beautiful chicken, a very interesting and probably very good spinach dish, and then these, of course, I know they're going to be wonderful, little tarts over here, and then a Madeira to go with it to, bring it all together. And I mean, can't we imagine just what it had been like if you were from the beggar's feast? If you were the beggar and you could just even see a meal like this, it would have been completely mind-blowing. Let's start with this spinach dish, and I haven't had one quite like this. And it really, really smelled good in the pan when it was cooking. And of course, going with this beautiful toasted bread. And it doesn't necessarily look amazingly appetizing, but I think one of the whole points of the dish like this is to figure out how to serve it so it does look beautiful. And it is very, very good. Spinach isn't my favorite thing, but this turned out great. The big question about the chicken here is, did it stay nice and moist? And a lot of these recipes were specifically working really hard at keeping the chicken moist, which can be hard when it's roasting over an open fire. So that many times they covered them with paper and did all sorts of tricks to keep them nice and moist. Let's try a little bit of this. And did the onion with the cloves come through in this bird? Really good question. Boom. Totally moist. Turned out great, this one. And the spices come through, even though this was sort of in the breast. As it rotates though, All those juices from the inside, especially from that onion and the cloves, get to go through the bird. That's the whole reason for turning that bird as it's cooking. So that really makes it great. And for dessert, these beautiful tarts, and I mean, you can't go wrong with these. They're basically preserves inside of a wonderful pie shell. I even went and found a particular tart paste recipe that was very, very heavy on the butter. And that's the one I used, and it turned out really, really good looking. So let's find out what it tastes like. Those are so good. That paste was just tremendous in here. A pie crust that you just want to eat that by itself, that's for sure. This is just a tiny sliver of the rich man's feast, and it is very good.